So a very common question I know that a lot of people have been kind of asking and floating around is whether or not it's actually physically possible for unemployment to extend once again in September in 2021. And the fast answer to that question is that yes, it is possible for them to potentially extend it again. It's not to say that they will be extending it, because at the end of the day, they still have to decide whether or not they're going to do it. But what today's video is really going to be about is to really show how it is possible that they may be able to extend it after it. It doesn't mean that they will. At this time period, there aren't any particular concrete plans, but it is to show how logistically they can potentially do it. Because I do know is that the surface answer that most people probably know or have been told is that in order to be able to approve the next unemployment extension, if they do, end up actually approving it, they would have to be able to get every single Democrat on board, and that includes Joe Manchin. And because Joe Manchin is not necessarily in support of it, then it probably means that it's going to be going through some kind of difficult. And while that is actually true, that if they really wanted to do a full-on unemployment extension, they probably will potentially have to have Joe Manchin. However, the great news, and I think it's something not a lot of people are talking about now, is that there are actual certain loopholes that people or states or representatives, or simply just put, whoever wants to take control of it, can potentially do in order to maybe extend it. So I want to talk about all of those specific details, because there are actually several methods. But as always, maybe real fast before we begin, consider smashing the like button, because we are hopefully talking about something hopeful and positive. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell for similar videos like this. And as always, feel free to comment any questions, thoughts about honestly just really anything, maybe a prediction, or honestly just really anything. Always great to say hi to new and familiar faces. So with that being said, let's get this video started right now. So for today's fourth stimulus check, fourth unemployment benefits extension update, as most people probably have already seen by the news, is that obviously our country is going through a lot of things right now, whether this has to do with Delta, job markets, unemployment rates, the stock market, and all sorts of different things. However, when it comes to the fourth unemployment benefits extension update, if it does end up happening, while we don't necessarily know whether it's going to happen and there are not necessarily concrete plans, there are actually a couple of methods that they can potentially use to maybe have it happen, even if Joe Manchin ultimately ends up not being on board with it. Of course, Joe Manchin, having him on board would probably be the easiest way, but really the first loophole that can potentially happen of how it can maybe get extended is if by the time that we end up hitting that date around September 2021, it is very, very possible, and it's not to say that it will happen, but that if Biden decides and chooses to do so, that he can actually potentially sign an executive order to potentially try to extend it again, even if briefly. This is actually exactly what President Trump did last year, as most of you guys know. If you guys have been here for a while now, huge hello and welcome, and thanks for being around. If you guys have been here ever since last year, when it's crazy, we are almost at the 1 year mark for that. But the idea is that very similar to what Trump did is that it is very, very possible at the last minute that even if the unemployment lapses and goes, that they can potentially try to create an executive order to extend the unemployment, even if it's briefly. This is especially true with Delta and everything that's currently going on, that there may lead to some kind of temporary sense of urgency to maybe try to do it while they're trying to fix and recover everything that's currently going on. This is even more true because we are already starting to see a lot of states that are imposing their own kinds of rules, whether this has to do with vaccine, masks, and the fact that we are now headed into the winter. So it's really, really difficult to call there, but it's to prove, it's to really just show that it is possible. Now, the second way that they may potentially be able to extend it is even if they are not able to get Joe Manchin on board, they may be able to do it on the state level as well. So it is very, very possible that even if as on a federal level they don't end up extending unemployment further, it is very possible that certain states may potentially now individually try to do their own unemployment program in order to extend it. This is actually even more true because many, many states right now still actually have a relative amount of funding or money that they had from the first 3 stimulus packages that did approve, so they may be potentially able to use that in order to kind of create their own programs. We are actually already seeing certain states try to create their own 4th and 5th stimulus check. So it is very hopefully fair to say is that if there are states, for example, the most popular one is California. There are people in California that it's already been approved, by the way. We did make a video that talked a lot more about that, which I'll put at the end screen if you by any chance happen to be in California or just simply interested in hearing, is really the fact that California has already actually approved an additional stimulus check just for the people that are inside of their state. Some people in California may even be getting a potential 5th stimulus check through this particular program. So it's kind of a 4th/5th, depending on how you kind of define it and what you physically qualify for. Of course, that just applies to one particular state. But the basis, really what it is to say is that it is very, very possible that if they're able to do their own stimulus check, other states can also potentially do their own unemployment programs just specific to them. There is only one thing really to note about this and it's really the fact that if this was going to happen, they would probably just do it individually on the state level. But the issue is, as you guys probably have followed for the last month and a half now, is that there are actually already a lot of states that have sadly actually already ended unemployment even earlier. So what this really shows is that at this point, it really, whether this ends up happening, is going to lie in the decisions in the hands of the people that represent your state. So it is going to be, again, another thing that's going to be relatively political and trying to avoid it, but it's just because it is actually physically political. What's going on is that if you happen to be from a state that has already ended unemployment, it probably means that the representatives within your state do not necessarily support the unemployment program. So it doesn't necessarily look likely that they will be doing any kind of further extension. However, if you do come from a state that actually did support the unemployment program and is actually in continuation or currently still on unemployment to this day, then it is possible that maybe your representatives can potentially try to fight for it in order to extend it even further, even if it's briefly by about 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, exactly like how we kind of mentioned that Trump did. So this is an actual real life scenario of something that has happened last year, if you guys remember, from like the LWA program that we talked about. And then if, let's say, for example, we end up in a situation where maybe Biden is hesitant to kind of do the extension with, like, as we mentioned in the first method/way, and then if, let's say, you happen to be from a state that maybe does not necessarily want to extend unemployment, then really the only last option, and this is probably the option that's the least likely to happen, but it is still a possibility at the end of the day, is the fact that it is very, very likely that now that they are working on the 4th infrastructure bill and they're trying to create social programs such as like the child tax credit. At this current time, there are subtle talks, but not anything particularly concrete about doing unemployment. But because of the sense of urgency that we are now starting to enter into the end date for unemployment and everything that's been going on, and because it also is exactly timed with when they will be negotiating things related to the 4th infrastructure, but specifically the human infrastructure plan, it is possible, and it's not to say that it's likely, that maybe they will try to insert it at the very, very last minute. And if, say, for example, Joe Manchin just doesn't support it, in the end, because it doesn't look like he's going to support it now, maybe they can potentially try to find someone else on the Republican side to try to sway over. It doesn't look likely, and that's the reason why I say it's probably the least likely thing to happen. Of course, it's really difficult to say because, for example, with the physical infrastructure, we did end up actually having several Republicans now end up actually voting in support of the physical infrastructure bill, and this was without budget reconciliation. So if they're able to even just have 1 or 2 of them on board, even if Joe Manchin doesn't fulfill that spot, it's possible that maybe someone on the other side can convert over in order to do it. It doesn't look likely, but it is still a possibility at the end of the day, so I figured it is still relatively important to maybe share it to just consider. So that's really what I just wanted to cover in today's update, but really the bottom line and overall summary is to really just show is that the unemployment extension after September 2021 is that there are ways that they can potentially do it, even beyond the fact that most people know about the Joe Manchin situation, how they have to get him on board in order to do it. They would have to get him on board if they want to do some kind of full-on extent federal program, especially if it means that they want to add funding into it. But if they're trying to take the money that they already have, for example, like with what Trump did last year with the LWA, then it is very, very possible that states, or simply put is that Biden, may find a way to potentially extend it, even if it's on a smaller scale, whether it is through, as we mentioned, the first way is through an executive order, or the second way, which is through like a state-specific program, although of course that second option is probably going to be a little bit more political depending on your state, so I know it's going to be biased again, but it is just simply what's happening. Or the third way is if they just somehow manage to put it inside of the fourth infrastructure bill / stimulus package, because there are, of course, at the end of the day, social programs that are meant to put money in people's pockets, and I think that's what people really care about and are looking for at the end of the day. But essentially, if you guys found that relatively insightful, maybe consider smashing the like button. If you guys enjoy videos or are interested in videos similar to this, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. Huge thanks if you guys made it all the way through to the end of this video. And with that being said, feel free to comment any questions, thoughts about anything, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for watching.